people who are working behind the scenes. And of course, let me extend a warm handshake to any potential advertiser out there, sponsor. If you want to come on our show, please do. We have viewership across and around the world. Viewers, to all those brothers and sisters across Guyana and the diaspora, a lot of times small parties historically have been ignored by larger parties, but they have always caused huge upsets. So we cannot and we should not. In fact, I have said it in the program earlier, that the fact that we have new parties coming up speaks well to a democracy, to a country that can always aspire for change and aspire for good things. Tonight, we have Mr. Robert Badal, presidential candidate of Change Guyana. And later tonight, we're going to have the chairman of a new and united Guyana. As I said, one cannot ignore the place that lies in the hands of small parties, especially when these small parties are being run by big men. And so here we have a big man with a huge building and huge and massive investments across the entire Georgetown. Many people may have known him associated just with the Pegasus, but he is much more spread than that in terms of his investment portfolio. Viewers, let us join me and let us say welcome to Mr. Robert Badal. Robert, welcome to our show tonight.
Oh, thank you, Yog. And thanks to Globespan and all the good people there. I'm a fan of yours, and I look at your program every week, but I'm happy to be here.
Wonderful. Before we get into the main discussion tonight, that is your party's agenda and your vision and so forth, let's talk about the man. You know, it's not something that we usually talk about, and many times people ignore this person and they just see your vision and your what you represent. We know you are from Berbice with humble beginnings, right? Tell us in a couple minutes, who is Robert? Where he came from? What is your fondest memory as a kid?
Well, Yog, as you mentioned, I'm from Berbice. I'm from rural Berbice, among the most rural of East Berbice. I grew up on a farm with my dad. I have a brother and a sister. I went through, like every other kid, going to primary, high school. After I passed my high school, my GCE O levels, I went into the cane fields because it had given me more opportunities in terms of income. Rather than having a teacher's job, well dressed and clean environment, I chose to go in the cane field. Fortunately, it gave me the opportunity through cadetship, Gaisuko's cadetship. I was selected to do a degree in agriculture, and it all started from there. From agriculture, I got a bit bored and I went into accounting and finance. And then after a few places of employment, I decided to start my own business. That's really the genesis of it.
Wonderful. Well, it's good to hear, and fellow Barbician, welcome once again to this program. Over the past 2 decades, let's get into this and let us put on some boxing gloves. Are you ready for this, Mr. Badal? Over the past 2 decades, you were cursed, literally cursed by the PPP. You're probably the sole reason Guyana has Marriotts today. You know that, right? Tell us a little bit about that period of time.
Well, Yoga, I mean, the culture, not only the PPP, but the two racially dominated parties, is that they feel that they dominate politics and in that way also business. So when you show that you're progressing independently of them, and you don't need to go to a minister to get favors, and you manage your business well, it did bring some kind of jealousy around, and I was singled out as a result. The powers within the PPP, when I started business, I hardly know any of them, but suddenly I became, attention was directed to to my businesses. I feel mainly because it was growing so fast. I make good decisions. I treat my employees well. I invest money. I don't have a very extravagant lifestyle. So I don't know, but at the same time, I'm very vocal about injustices. If I see something is wrong, if I see the fact that we don't have good roads or people cannot afford medical care or there are wastage in terms of contracts and overpriced contracts, I raise my voice against it. So I've been writing in the papers and it caught the attention of the powers. And I believe that there is where it started. At the time, I had Guyana Stock Feeds and the sister oil company there, and I was just about the time bringing Popeye's chicken into Guyana. And you would recall Popeye's chicken with a mile-long line when it opened. And then some people didn't like it because they were in the fast food business, and they were aligned with the powers of the day. And I believe there is where it started. What happened is that my permit for my building permit and EPA permits, they were denied basically because of somebody want to give you a hard time. For example, when I applied for the EPA permit, uh, even though it was an industrial zone and permit there is just a matter of formality, I had to go to the court to address the abuse of political authority at the level of the office of president that directed the EPA to deny the permit. Then when I required building permit for the rice mill, now having had a court order to release the EPA permit, the Central Housing and Planning approved the building permission, but the Minister of Housing then was directed to go the next day and summon an extraordinary general meeting to rescind that permit. I had to go again to the court. Now that business is so well run. It's dominated shelves in all across the region, the brand of rice that I created as a result, despite the fact of those obstacles.
Mm-hmm.
So I consistently have been raising my voice against the abuse of power in the political administration. And
Right.
because of that, I believe that I was singled for intimidation and obstacles in my
So,
path.
so under the PPP, you were not seen as a friend to the PPP under the PPP's government. In fact, not many people or any people who would have been outspoken against the then government were friends. Just a quick one, just to answer a question that came to me. Like me, you're a chartered accountant, right?
Yes, of course.
All right, great. So you were not a friend, or the PPP didn't necessarily embrace you and didn't see you as a friend. And on the other side of the coin, the current finance minister has accused you of dipping into concessions, and they would have this country believe that they did you a huge favor and granted you billions in concessions.
Well, I want to clarify that.
Please do.
I've been told about the minister contention that I've been given billions of dollars. But what the minister was referring to was industry-wide measures that was intended to be given to any company within the tourism industry. Now, the concession that was granted was just concession so that I don't pay import tax on the imports that I require to build to extend the Pegasus business. Now, that is normal in any country. In fact, in other countries, you don't have to go to a minister or a Go Invest to do it. It is written in law and it's there. You just go to it's in the tax code. So nobody has to run to a minister. It's not as if I've been given anything unfairly. In fact, what I was granted, to do 100 million development in the tourist sector. the biggest ever in this country in terms of buildings and accommodation
Right.
and office complex. What I was granted is a fraction of what Marriott was granted, a fraction of what Princess or Buddies was granted. So, I mean, I don't understand what the minister is saying, as if he has given me billions of dollars. I've worked hard for my money. And
So
what was given, I was entitled to, and even much more, I'm entitled to under the law.
right. So let me just tell me if I'm right in putting it like this. Now, the fact is that, or you're saying that whatever you received was a matter of any investor of your stature ought to have received and more. Yes? No?
Of course.
So
But let's
and
look at it this way.
one last thing, and you'll put it your way, and that you never received concessions must not be interpreted by people to mean cash.
Of course not. It's not as if the minister wrote a check and give me
Good.
billions of dollars that
Thank
is
you.
before it. But you see, there is where I differ in terms of policies with what the minister is articulating, and the same kind of attitude of the previous administration. Now, our plan here, but let me say this first. The minister is boasting about billions of concession granted to me. When oil companies and other foreign companies are coming into Guyana, they can get to see the minister at any time they want, and they are being given. We're paying taxes. We're not getting a fraction of what you call the concession. For example, those companies are paying no income tax, no withholding tax, no VAT, no corporate taxes, no property taxes. We are paying property taxes. We are paying VAT. We are paying to subsidize the establishment of foreign companies in Guyana. And the minister must address these issues. I've been talking about these issues for a long time. And instead of accusing me of getting billions in concession, he should address the poor economic policy that he has on the table onto this day.
So here is what. Tell us a little bit about GPL. Here is why I want to get these things dealt with. You were part of this government. In one way or another, you were part of the PNC, APNU, AFC government. You were the head of GPL for, I believe, a brief period of time. Why is Robert Badal, who would have been part of this current government that has lost favor with many Guyanese, why is Robert Badal coming to the Guyanese people to say, the government that I was part of cannot do it in the future, give me, Robert Badal, a chance?
Well, of course, I was at GPL for 2 years, and I only took that assignment because nobody wanted it. So, because I've been successful in business, I want to understand why can't GPL be turned around financially and operationally. Now, during that period that I was chairman, I mean, there are a lot of things people are saying. I mean, you can't fix GPL overnight. 2 years is not enough, because your GPL requires heavy investments. Repeated administrations have neglected GPL. It has been underinvested. For example, investments in generation. The grid is very old. But what I did in GPL, within 2 years, I filled 4 executive positions that were vacant even before the administration came to office, even under the PPP. I recruited a CEO on the day that I resigned, because I made that commitment that I'm not going anywhere until it has a substantive CEO. Now, before that, in the 2 years, I saved $7 billion added to GPL's cash flow, never in the history of GPL, because you would recall that most years GPL had to be bailed out by subvention. Yes. And in the last 10 years, GPL has been bailed out to the tune of $22 billion. And for me to save $7 billion added to the cash flow in 2 years, that is a performance.
And very good, but can you say, yes.
The other things that I did was that I renew units in Anna Regina, in Bartica, in Canefield. Those units were 33 years old, which meant that the PPP administration never renewed
Mhm.
those areas in the 23 years of office. So there was a total neglect, for example, of the generating assets and of the grid itself. There were also very poor decisions taken. Every year, there's an underwater cable that runs from Reading Hoop to Georgetown to bring back power to Georgetown. I mean, those those were the poor decisions that that I've mentioned, all over the period. And the grid is old and it needs substantial investments. Prior to leaving GPL, I did advertise for a 50 megawatt um, at Garden of Eden, primarily because of the fact that those units were getting old and it requires 2 years planning time to get them in operation.
Mhm.
Sadly, after I left GPL, that tender that had about 26 bidders from all over the region, that plan was shelved. So it's not that I've not improved GPL. Within 3 months of taking over, I reduced the cost of electricity by 20%. I give
Right.
a 20% reduction to the consumer. So a 20% reduction, a $7 billion added to the cash flow. We never had to ask for bailout. Last year, this year and last year, the financials are showing last year was $4 billion in deficit. This $3.8 billion in deficit. This year, $4 billion in deficit. Tell me if there was any problem
Right.
with my performance at GPL.
Right. Well, the one question that I would have for you there as a follow-up is it's interesting you said that you would have played a role in ensuring that the vacancy, and I noted your words carefully, you would have played a role in ensuring that the vacancy of the CEO was filled. I don't know that you played a role in selecting the CEO because I think many people have, and I know for one that the selection of many of the heads of agencies were based on party and other lines.
No, but let me tell you clearly on that.
Uh-huh.
That one was not based on party lines. I mean, we took a year to recruit a CEO, more than a year, because of the problem with skills here at
Mhm.
that level. But it wasn't, I was involved in the selection, but there are significant difficulties in getting, I mean, people of that level with utility experience, with electricity generation and the grid experience.
Mhm.
And the CEO now, he brought a lot of skills. He had worked with the Jamaica Public Company, which is like a
Good.
hundred times the size of
Right.
GPL here.
But I think over the past 3 years we haven't really seen the leadership. I mean, I think for them to blame the human resource people and fire them. But let's move away from GPL. Because we got a lot of things we want to talk tonight and the time is short. Sugar. Let's move from GPL to sugar. I know that the PVP has said that they want to reopen the estates, and I think there are some analysts who have been going around. My fear, Robert, is that when we build people's expectations and we cannot deliver on those expectations, which is what the APNU government did, we are putting this country in a wild spin. Now, PVP has said they're going to reopen estates. You have said that's baloney.
Of course. And I
So
believe,
let's
you
hear.
know,
Yes.
I've been a businessman for more than just over 20 years now. And I've made any industry I got into, any deal I've touched has been a success. All my companies are market leaders. The rice I do in every supermarket around the region. The poultry industry, I've elevated that industry 10 times since I took over Guyana Stock Feeds. At the hotel, you know what I did to this hotel to bring it to
Mhm.
the level it is today. And then 100 million US dollars expansion. I'm an experienced businessman. I can see through opportunities. The, the plan of the PPP is another what the previous election we used to call, lie to them and then do that. You know, I don't want to say the word.
Mm-hmm.
And they have been famous in making promises, failed promises, to the people in the sugar belt because they want to keep those people under political control, as they have done all over the years, as a means of keeping them in power. Now let's examine that case of reopening sugar estates.
Mm-hmm.
There is no way anybody could reopen those sugar estates. And let me tell you why. Number one, those estates have suffered years and years of neglect in terms of modernization, in terms of maintenance. The field infrastructure has been neglected, not only over the last year after they have been closed, but long before. The 200 million US dollars that was spent on Skeldon, that big white elephant, 10% of that would have modernized all the sugar factories. Another 10% would have added cogeneration and increased the earnings of the sugar industry by 20%. Another 10% would have expanded the value added capability of sugar and make it viable. Now, all countries in this region have closed their sugar estate. Our cost of production is double the world market price. You tell me how you're going to reopen sugar estate. But I'll tell you the plan of the PPP. If the reopening of any sugar estate would not only bankrupt the entire Gaisuko, it will bankrupt this country. And those people, look at the promises that have been made. Look at the track record of investing money. Look at the wastage. $22 billion given to GPL over the last 10 years. 77 billion given to Gaisuko over the last 10 years. Do they want to bankrupt this economy? Do the people of this country have to continue with failed promises and uneconomic measures and wastage all their life?
So I get your argument because you're saying, in other words, there should be a proper feasibility study done before one could make such a decision to reopen or not to reopen.
Yo, let me give you another fact. Look at the opportunity cost. The bailouts that were given to state corporations because of the mismanagement, the political domination and appointments in state corporations that sits on billions of dollars in this country.
Correct.
Those bailouts are more than 100 billion in the last 10 years. That could have built 2 bridges across the Demerara River, another bridge across the Berbice River. We could have had a big highway from Ogle to Timeri. We could have had big hospitals around this country. Look at the opportunity cost. But let me go into the micro aspect now. An acre of sugarcane fields generate, let's say, around $900 US an acre, right? The opportunity cost of that, having that with rice, will generate significantly more, and it would not require bailout. You do aquaculture, it's 10 times that value. You tell me, should we orient people from the plantations, from sugarcane, from cane cutting, to more value-added entrepreneurship? And that's the plan that I'm bringing. That is the plan that Change Guyana is bringing. Not keep people cutting cane, not fooling people, not keep them in poverty and political subjugation. We are freeing people from the political bondage of the 2 racially dominated parties.
So let's take that on another limb, Robert. So the PPP, that's their record based on what your analysis there. The APNO AFC government, however, went ahead and closed estates without having an alternate plan for 10,000 people. Is that something that you would have done? Is that something you opposed when you were part of the APNO government?
Well, let me clarify. I've never been a part of the APNO government, and I've said this many times. I supported the change in 2015 because a lot of people suffer from 23 years of one-party rule, and I'm proud of that moment when I contributed to that. After then, I was never associated with any political party. I've never been a member of any political party. But let me address the matter of the closure of the sugar estates. Now, when APNO took over, the CEO of Gaisuko went to the cabinet and said Gaisuko is bankrupt, and he gave the figures and he gave all the facts. Now, a responsible government, a government that understands the implications of having viable industries state-owned,
Hmm.
right? Would have said, look, guys, right now, we say, look, they did this massive study and they decided to close three sugar estates. Their method of closing this estate, I mean, of course, I would not close an estate without a relief economic plan for the people in those areas. And I'll tell you what they should have done. Instead of having that SPU, as they call it there, that have no experience whatsoever of the sugar industry or reorganizing businesses in general. They put it on the SPU NISIL, the famous NISIL.
Right.
I would have put that to a Wall Street firm that has the geographical reach, the clientele, and the financing capability to divest those estates. And a
Right.
lot of people came to buy those estates, but the bureaucracy turned them away. They went elsewhere. They had an ample opportunity to divest. Look the record of rice, and that's the point I'm bringing. Look the record of rice. Privatization doesn't mean loss of job. The fact that the rice industry is sustainable on lands that are comparable to sugarcane lands, that is profitable and support communities all over the country, is the fact that it's in private hands. And APNO had an apple 3 years to do that, to sign deals for those closed sugar estates. And they could have done it successfully. But making decisions in that cabinet by people who has no business experience takes time. And
So,
and
so let me interject. Let me interject to ask you this. We understand that. In fact, you know your numbers. You're a finance guy, and you know how to assess and how to strategize to get maximum returns on investment. Amar has put it well. The, the problem we have in Guyana is that political persons, those in power, always appoint people without any experience in the relevant industries. You've had an agricultural minister who probably doesn't know the difference between many types of peppers or grass, even. You have had people in various positions. NISIL, what do they know about agriculture and who is their expertise that can advise them about Gaisuku? So the fact is that decisions have been made that were not. You see, why I ask you this question about Gaisuku? Dealing with Gaisuku is not a Gaisuku problem alone. It's not a sugar workers problem. It's not a political problem. It's a Guyana issue. You have 25,000 people there. And for God's sake, we need to look after our people. So a government that could come up with a proper plan and put the right people in place will surely attract people in medium to long term. Here is another question I have for you. So we have issues with governments. We have an issue with the last government and their management of sugar and the money from EU and all of that. We have a rank disrespect from the current government, and but the problem we have is that the governments have, as what is a common word nowadays, an unbothered attitude. They couldn't care less that 1 in 3 Guyanese are living under poverty. What will you do to assess and address poverty?
well, I would say it a little more than that. The way you say it about governments, I felt that throughout history, the record is there that successive governments have been incompetent. They rely on big government that requires heavy taxation, so they transfer income and wealth from the masses to the government coffers that are then wasted on uneconomic projects that are being wasted on covering incompetence in the case of bailout of state corporations. So you cannot rely on government to make decisions. Government under our plan will be very competent, understand how business work, where decisions are made promptly, where we recognize the social implications of every decision, where we don't make a decision, for example, to close an estate without an economic relief plan or a transition away from sugar. Our plan to alleviate poverty, not only in sugar areas, but across the across Guyana. What has been happening over successive administrations is that the taxes are collected, the income are collected, the investments are done in Georgetown, rural areas are neglected. Since the closure of bauxite, nothing was done in East Berbice in New Amsterdam to facilitate the entrepreneurship and the creation of light industries, light manufacturing industries that have all died in New Amsterdam because they rely on bauxite. Now sugar has been closed. There's nothing to replace sugar in Wales, in Rose Hall,
and you see,
not areas, but
not many people realize if you go down to Corriverton, you go down to Crabbe Creek, you go down to that area there, you go across the Wales, people are suffering. And the politicians don't give a damn about people suffering in this country. Now, here is another thing that I know has been asked of you, but I want to put it out there. Did the APNU government, did the APNU AFC government give Robert Badal a huge favor by not appealing your dilution of the shares, Guyana Stock Feeds Limited shares, where the shares came down by, I think, from 38% holdings of the government of Guyana to 7% holdings. And you diluted, I think, a $1,000 share to a $15 share. The twofold question I have. If you were the president of the country, would you allow such a transaction? And two, did the APNU government do you a favor by allowing you to dilute the shares the way you did?
Yo, I've said it before and I'll say it again. To understand that issue, you really have to understand clearly what transpired. And it comes back to a government or politicians who are weak decision makers. They don't understand company law. They don't understand the implications of not making a decision. So they sit there and kick the problem down the road. When my company offered them shares like we did other shareholders, they saw it as, okay, but I'll raise in money and that will expand his business. So the president at the time there instructed Nisil, who unto this day who held the shares in Guyana Stockfeed, not to take up their entitlement. You see, they did not take up their entitlement.
I understand.
According to the rules of the issue, that whatever shares are not taken up, then it's distributed to shareholders in proportion to their holdings.
Correct.
And that's what the appeal. That's what the appeal. When I appeal the matter, the Jainarayan Singh Jr. decision, when he gave 20 decisions in one day, the day he was retiring, and he was forced to do that, his pension was held back until he made that decision. He gave no written decision, and the higher court, recognized that there was a problem there, revisited the matter, and said, look, there's no cause. They couldn't uphold the Jainarayan Singh decision. Now, in company law, when you issue shares and it has a closing date, it always comes with a closing date. Mm-hmm. If you don't take up your entitlement.
Understood. So you're negating any notion that you acted in any way outside of what is professionally allowed by the laws. And I'm reminded when Donald Trump was, hats off to him. He said, if the politicians don't understand the laws and I take advantage of whatever there is in the laws, good for me. He's today the president of America.
But Yogi, it's not taking advantage. They were given time.
I didn't mean it in a negative way. I meant it in a positive way.
But they were given time and opportunity to take their shares. And when we issued the shares, their representative voted unanimously for the issue.
Correct.
Now, where is the problem? The problem is that the PPP administration, having not in favor of Robert Badal, right, create this argument that I have defrauded the government. I haven't. Now, comparing that with the issue of shares to a new GPC, a friend of the former president. They issued 60% shares to new GPC. 10% was supposed to be reserved for employees.
Right.
They issue the other 30% to new GPC without a tender. They made no noise. The new GPC got a preferential price because that's a friend of the former president. And let me finish. And let me finish. On to this day, employees didn't get their 10%.
We know that history. So here is what. So we're gonna run out of time. So this is why I'm sorry to be rushing you. Here is what, Robert. Why, Robert? Why change Guyana? Why not AFC, APNU, PPP? Why, Robert?
When I contributed to that change in 2015, my motive was that my belief was that it was a shame to have in this rich part of South America a one-party state that has been there for 23 years, and at the time our per capita income was below 4,000 US dollars, when right across Trinidad is 18,000 US dollars per capita. Little Antigua is 17,000, Barbados around 17,000. We are a quarter of those in the midst of wealth. And I couldn't stand the fact that we have an administration with that was overseeing a lot of corruption, that was taking money from that ought to have gone to medical care and improving roads. We had roads that were being built that last a rainy season. We have a 1 mile road built, but 2 miles were paid for. The level of corruption in the administration, that being a conscientious Guyanese, I mean, I do well in business, but when I see the injustices, economic and social injustice, whatever the injustice is, I have to take a stand. And exactly what I'm doing now, and exactly what the people that we have talked to all across this country are saying, that the two-party system has not worked in their favor. If our per capita income is quarter that of Little Antigua, you tell me that's the way we judge a country's economic performance, and tell me whether these two administrations have performed. My party belief is that they have not performed. I am making a personal sacrifice, putting myself out there. We have good responses from the people who feel that we're doing something heroic, that no other businessman has put themselves out there. A lot of people sit in a corner, fearing intimidation.
So here is a question for you. Here is a question for you. Joe Jaglal from Canada. Mr. Badal, will you consider joining the APNU coalition?
I've seen that about a dozen times already.
Correct.
The reason why I'm in this is the fact that they have not performed. Their system of government is different. The big government based on high taxation and no economic growth. Our system, in addition, the party paramountcy principles that put square pegs in round holes, both the PPP and PNC APNU. Our plan is to ignite this economy, ensure we have a low taxation policy to stimulate growth and investment. This is the only way to create jobs and lift people out of poverty. That's our plan. Look,
you're not considering, your party will not consider coalition.
Of course we will not. We will maintain our independence because that's what our supporters are asking, and that is on the basis of why I am in this. I mean, there will be virtually no coalition with the two major parties. We would look at getting the smaller parties to join us because we are ahead of everybody here, and our plan is widely being read. Every week we have press conference. I mentioned the opportunity cost of those failure of those administration. We could have been way ahead.
Here is another question for you. We do know the successive governments of Guyana have felt that Guyanese are blind and deaf. They don't see crime, they don't hear, and they don't know who's corrupt. But we see damn well, we know the stealing that's going on. Will your party prosecute those who are currently and have engaged in fraud of state assets and state funds?
I've asked in 2015, I raised my voice against the corruption, mainly the level of corruption under the PPP. And I'm committed, I'm convinced that one of Guyana's main problem, in addition to the big government and high taxation, is the level of corruption that take money out of people's pockets, that could have been spent on improving medical care, increasing pensions, paying teachers, nurses, police higher salaries, taking care of the corruption. I mean, these are the things. On day one, I will bring legislative reform in the area of corruption so that not only the taker of the bribe is jailed, but also the giver. Right. And where it relates to contractors and they give bribe and corrupt the system, I will ensure that they're banned for life. They can never have another contract again. Various other measures. I'll increase the standard of living.
So you are going to take a strong stand against corruption. Will you initiate an independent commission that can assess and address every single public tender?
Well, it's counterproductive to have an independent commission to look at every tender. I don't think it's practical. But what I will do
is hold on. Framework. Let me put it this way. Listen, as a developing country, here one of the many ways we have bled a lot is through public tender, is through the tendering process that has, cabinet gives a no objection, and all of a sudden billions of dollars of drugs are being bought from somebody somewhere.
Well, let me tell you,
but we need an independent commission that can post-contract assess and address it from an independent perspective and put it in the public domain.
Well, what I will do, Yog, because what you're advocating there is not possible. What I will do is my overall framework in addressing corruption and integrity in public office generally is that we will integrate a body, the Integrity Commission. We will also have an arm of that commission responsible for investigating contracts, not commission.
No, but I have to cut you there. Look, you got a bunch of people sworn in as members of National Assembly knowing that they're dual citizens, swore affidavits that they're not to enter into parliament. It's until Charandas blew the lid off, then everybody scattered. So integrity and politics seems to be enemies.
No, look at our plan. By elevating the standard of living through job creation, through paying the public sector more, a highly trained public sector that earns more will steal less.
You really think so? Really think so?
Look,
I mean, these guys went in there and gave themselves how much % increase within 30 days of government?
Let me finish. An independent, well-trained public sector will become more efficient, save the government a lot of money, and would be more honest. My platform of an honest, open, transparent, accountable government. We'll do that by the economic development that we talk about that will address crime. When people get a job, there's less crime in any economy. The problem of crime is a reflection of the economic problem. So once we address the economic problem, but the legislative reform that we will bring in place to address corruption, the penalties and the oversight and the independent investigation, not a commission to oversee every contract, but if you put your hand on the treasury and you're caught because of in the investigation and the controls that we'll put in place, then the force of the law will come on.
Robert,
onto you.
You know what a former president used to say? Donald Ramatar used to say, bring the proof. You can't
Well,
find proof. Current
well,
government, current president is saying they hide out all the proof, and his people hiding out all the proof too.
yeah.
So we're gonna beg to differ at that stage, and I'm gonna ask you. Let us take this conversation up another day because I really want to get into how these small parties, how these new parties plan to address this disease that has tainted Guyana, that of corruption.
Well,
So
let me close by saying
yes, please.
on that same principle, previous former president or any public servant would say bring the evidence because they marginalize the Integrity Commission, they marginalize the state audit function, they marginalize all oversight. You have to go to a minister for the groovy train, the politics of scarcity. So that's how they can tell you bring the evidence. My plan is to ensure that wherever the evidence is detected because of the systems and the controls we'll have in place, and also the penalties. That's how
Thank
we
you.
will.
Thank you very much. It's been a wonderful conversation. We're out of time. As I said, we must do this again. But give me your final thoughts and give your final message on behalf of Change Guyana.
Well, I don't like to be called small parties. Change Guyana is not a small party by any means. We are only now 6 weeks, and already we have I mean, we're all over the social media. We have representatives across this region. So we have made significant progress in 6 weeks. And the next 6 weeks, we'll probably double or triple that. So we like to be called a credible option for the Guyanese people after decades of failure of leadership under both parties, both ethnically dominated parties. And that's, we bring a new style of leadership, an economic plan of low taxation and give more money in the people's pocket. And we mentioned all the various policies. Our approach to development is different. If we have time, I'll tell you our approach and their approach just in 1 minute.
Let's keep that approach, the strategic view, because what I would like to do is invite you and your prime ministerial candidate for another show to discuss your strategies. So let's leave it there, and I'm going to give you 30 seconds to wrap up and to and we move on. But in your 30 seconds, if you can just let us refocus on your main drive and what you plan to do in the next 2 weeks leading to Christmas.
Well, well, a lot of people you won't see a lot of activity during Christmas because we don't want to, impose on people time during the holidays. But definitely, we'll have a lot of ground operations taking place. I think the people are already taking Change Guyana seriously. A lot of propaganda in the media, but myself and all the people that are endorsing Change Guyana. Tomorrow we have a press conference. We have about 4 endorsers. People are really come forward. You see, the Guyanese people have been beaten up all over the years because of discrimination. Keep contracts away from credible people. Anybody that raise their voices, they're marginalized, intimidated, and they have thousands of people under the PPP and APNO on that social media.
Gotcha.
Criticizing, bombarding you with messages, but this is what we are fighting against. We are fighting against the fact that repeated administrations have failed the people of this country, and therefore a credible alternative is the right thing right now. And I believe Change Guyana is the right choice right now for all Guyanese.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to have you on board, Mr. Badal. Viewers, we say good night to Mr. Robert Badal, presidential candidate of Change Guyana. As we leave this segment of the program, we're going to go for a commercial break. Mr. Badal, we wish you a lot of success. Take the fight on and march ahead.
Good night.
Support GlobeSpan 24/7 initiatives by sponsoring our programs. Our goal is to bring all sides to the table, and with your help, this can become possible. With your support, we can shape a greater nation together. Contact sales at globespan247.com for more information, or inbox us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn.
GlobeSpan's professional platform is now available for rental. Create your own content, promote your business, and reach hundreds of thousands of viewers in Guyana, United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom. Globespan gives you the ability to interact with viewers and guests to reach the multitude. Contact sales at globespan247.com for more information.
Thank you, and we are back online live. And to our viewers out there, that was a good discussion we have had with Mr. Robert Badal, presidential candidate of Change Guyana. As I said at the top of the program, the small parties, let us just stop saying small parties, maybe the new parties, they're looking at making an impact to inspire the Guyanese people to think differently and act differently. Here's a man that I've known quite a while, not very close, but I've known him and I've known of him, Mr. Timothy Jonas. He's the chairman of a new and united Guyana. Tim, welcome to this second segment of tonight's show. I'm not getting any voice from you, Tim. Your mute button is on.
Is that better?
Very much, yes.
Thank you very much. It's good to see you, and it's good to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Tim, we spoke on the same program maybe about a month ago, and from then to now, a lot of things have happened. You are a legal luminary. You are a man who would have, delved into the law books and probably pelted a few people with the law books during your career. Legal-wise, I want us to start this discussion on a new and united Guyana, Anog, and your plans for Guyana by talking briefly about your focal point. You and Ralph have spoken excessively and repeatedly about constitutional reform. We know that is one of your agenda, but talk a little bit about whether there is need for, in your experience and Anog's position, for not just constitutional but judicial reforms.
That's an interesting change of speed. We have, at this moment, in my view, the strongest judiciary that has been in existence in my years of practice. There will always be weak links, but there has been a radical shift in culture in our judiciary and indeed in the entire legal fraternity. The momentum began with the change of the civil rules 3 years ago in 2016. And people who are in the business community, who are in the commercial sector in Guyana, will tell you, the bankers, the insurers, the businessmen, that there is a much greater confidence now in the legal system and in getting a quick result and a realistic, practical result today than there has been in the last 20 years. So when we talk about fixing the judiciary, I think that's a nice cliche, it's a nice tagline, but our judiciary has been very independent. They have shown a courage in the face of adversity from the executive, but recently they have improved even on that. And they are showing a work ethic and a determination to get the work done. And a lot has been done in the last 3 years.
Yeah, I will agree with you, because I think one of the things not many Guyanese know, but around the world, Guyanese judiciary is quoted. I mean, you study in various places, whether you do law or you do other stuff, the Guyanese judiciary system is quoted and looked up to. And historically, even though, there is this notion of the 28 years of the PNC being dictatorial and all of that, still the judiciary in many ways stood up. There was the Timal case and many more. But let us come to politics. And I want to pick you up, I want to take you up on where I left off the discussion with Robert Badal, corruption. There's the notion across the country, a lot of people are concerned that corruption seems to be like a runaway train, and everybody who says they will fix it and they will stop it, they end up being corrupt themselves. What is Anog's position on corruption, and how do you plan to really tackle this, or what measures you plan to propose in the House that can really be different from what has happened in the past?
That is the key question. And I think that is what every Guyanese is concerned about. A funny thing happened in 2015. Guyanese realized for the first time, and I think it was an even greater shock to the PPP, that at long last there are enough liberal, independent thinkers in Guyana to break the ethnic deadlock that the two parties have held Guyana in for the last 50 years. So, for the first time, the PPP lost a fair election because there were enough independent voters to say, we have had enough of you and your 23 years of corruption, and we can move on. Um, Now, unfortunately, the hope that sprung from that wonderful moment of renaissance has been dashed over the last 4 years. We have seen that the culture and the activity of the APNU has been no different from the PPP or of the PNC of old. Their bad practices remain. The method of dealing with the business community, their policies, the stranglehold that they have on the society, it remains the same. So that the hope has been dashed. Now, corruption is something that thrives in secret areas. No one is corrupt in the open. And what happens in our winner take all system is that when one of the two parties gets into power, the system allows the ministers in the different portfolios to appoint their own boards and their own commissions, so that you have a system of family and friends who run the different financial organizations. So NISL, Chronicle, Central Housing, EPA, Petroleum, Timber, the Forestry, they are all run by commissions that are appointed by ministers. So friends and family are appointed. And that is fertile ground for corruption. Because in a small enclave of friends, you can make secret deals.
Let me interject. Take St. Kitts Nevis. Everybody is everybody's family and friend there. The smaller countries with very small population, they manage it, and they manage it quite well, notwithstanding people may be family and friends. Why is it and how is it we can? I noticed one of our viewers have said, I can't remember who said it, but until we're ready to jail some of these corrupt officials, we're never really going to stop it. I remember when Desmond High decided to reinstitute the capital punishment. That crime came right down instantly. So, yeah, I agree. There is a lot of cronyism and nepotism and so forth. But, what else?
Your example of St. Kitts is a good one. It's interesting because in St. Kitts, the corruption in the police force in the early 90s was such that a deputy commissioner of police from Guyana was actually invited to St. Kitts to take over their police force and to transform it. And the reason they went to a deputy commissioner of police of Guyana was because they recognized that if they picked someone from St. Kitts, he was so familiar in the community that he was already steeped in that family and friends corruption. So you talk about St. Kitts, but St. Kitts is not known for anti-corruption. St. Kitts is part of the problem. I don't think that your comparison is fair.
Okay.
But what I was getting at in Guyana is that if the system can evolve so that all arrangements, all boards, all commissions are run by both parties, by representatives of both of the ethnic parties, then decisions which are made will be made under the scrutiny of representatives of both large ethnic groups. And there will be fair representation of both ethnic interests. Neither ethnic side will feel excluded. But more importantly, when a bad decision is made, when corruption is uncovered, we will not have the tit-for-tat nonsensical political debate that we have now, where one side says, look how corrupt you are, and the other side says, oh, but you used to be more corrupt. Because both ethnic parties will have been involved in that political decision. And therefore, there will have to be genuine accountability to their people, because there will be no more finger pointing. And I think that's the first step. I think that's what needs to be done. There needs to be transparency. And what happens is if both sides are represented at that decision-making process, then if you're on one side and you try to include a family and friends deal, the other side will go kicking and screaming to the public.
Correct.
Transparency is going to break corruption, but we need to reform the system so that there is transparency in the decision-making process, and that can only be done by a system of inclusive governance.
Correct. I do not disagree with you, because I think the notion out there, a lot of people have the view that the problem with this government being unable to prosecute former officials is due by and large to a factor, or whether it's belief or whether it's perception or fact, that everybody has secrets for each other, and so you carry one side down, you're gonna go down when your time comes. But let's move away from this, because indeed a lot of people are looking to the new parties to put a cap on this thing called corruption, and we know that you and Ralph have been strong in your messaging out there with regards to that. Investment strategy. Given that look, the next, I've said this at the last show and the one before, the next national budget that is presented to the Parliament of Guyana will be spending oil money. So what is ANOG's position with investment strategies and creating more sustainable? I don't know if you noticed, Monday I had Dr. Neil Parsan on this show, and he has been an activist in terms of helping countries transform to oil and investments and so forth. And he was keen on one thing: use the oil money to create sustainable industries. What's ANOG's position with investment and encouraging investments in the future?
Well, there are two aspects to investment. The oil money is a windfall. We don't know how long it will last, because, as you know, with green economies and the move against pollution, a lot of the states in the first world are trying to move away from oil. But there's no doubt there will be a huge amount of money available in the short and medium term in Guyana. The question arises, how best to use it? Now, we've already seen recently that we are going down the road to how worst to misuse it.
Correct.
We've seen in the media, it's been reported that our Minister of Finance has said that they will be opening a bank account in New York, and oil revenue will be going to this bank account. Now, that should create an alarm for every Guyanese that hears this, because this is the same minister who tried his best to hide a pittance $18 million signing bonus, which the government had managed to negotiate by poor negotiation and should have gotten much more. So, having negotiated poorly to get scraps, they then tried their best to hide scraps from the people. And it was only accidentally that transparency took place and people learned of this signing bonus. We cannot have this situation where that same group of cronies, the same family and friends, want to avoid a system that already exists, that attempts accountability, to say they're going to put it in an account, and the public then have a problem as to how to see it and how to see it being spent.
Correct.
The system in Guyana is very clear. All revenue, all royalties, all money, all taxes that go to the state must be paid into the consolidated fund. If you want money from the consolidated fund, and if the government wants to spend money and it presents a budget to Parliament, that is debated in Parliament publicly for everybody to see. Right. And Parliament approves taking money out of the consolidated fund to spend pursuant to this budget that it has approved. Mm-hmm. As soon as you change that system so that money is no longer going to the consolidated fund, you sidestep this need for public scrutiny and public parliamentary debate as to how to spend your money. And we will not see that money again. That money will be misspent. Family, friends, cronyism.
So, in fact,
need to be very worried.
Yeah, in fact, one of the other interesting points that I wanted to place in front of you, again, coming out of the discussion with Dr. Parsan, Trinidad in 2011, thereabouts, they had recommended establishing a minimum withdrawal from the Sovereign Wealth Fund. In other words, they were saying, beyond this, you cannot withdraw, regardless of what's the situation in the country. And to your point, I like that point, and it is something that should be expressed even more. The moment we put these funds away where there is no public scrutiny, it's gone, it's done, it's finished with. However, I'm going to repeat something that you would have heard many times. What's to stop these two juggernauts? What's to stop it's winner take all politics? What's to stop whoever is in government from doing it?
Ah, and this is where a non-united Guyana is different from the other third parties that you have been interfacing with and that the public has heard from. Because a non-united Guyana is not going to say to the people that at long last Guyana has broken the back of ethnic politics and a third party is going to win the government. That's not going to be the case. In all likelihood, it would be wonderful if it happens, but in
Mhm.
all likelihood, either the PPP or the APNU will be in government after March 2020. The only hope that Guyana has is that that core of independent voters who recognizes the harm in that ethno-political fight that has harmed us for 50 years and will vote independently. The only hope Guyana has is that there are enough of them to put a third party into parliament with sufficient seats that whichever of the two harmful parties wins the government, they only have a minority in parliament so that they do not control the law making process.
Correct.
If that happens, if a
Mhm.
new and united Guyana is placed in that happy position that it has, together with the opposition, it doesn't matter if it's PPP or APNU in opposition, they're both equally wrong. But together with the opposition, if they have majority in parliament so that parliament is truly independent, there are things that we can do. You speak about oil and gas. The Petroleum Act, the legislation creates a board
Mhm.
that is supposed to deal with the sovereign wealth fund. Right now, that board is appointed directly or indirectly by the minister, and we are back to square one. We're back to the same problem we had when Robert Prasad was able to give radio licenses to people that he wanted, or when when the government was able to give land and create Pradoville to people that they wanted. We're back to that situation if we allow the minister to appoint that commission under the petroleum legislation.
Correct.
That
Which,
commission,
which the current legislation does allow, right?
which the current legislation unfortunately does allow, and it will always allow as long as these two parties continue to hold sway in the country because they like their monopoly. They like having access to the candy that is in the consolidated fund. They like paying themselves to sit down in parliament and do nothing. They like giving themselves duty-free concessions so that they can drive around in Prados and pretend that they are first-class citizens while the rest of us wallow in poverty. They like that. So they
Correct.
like having that access to free money, and that needs to be broken.
Mhm.
And the way to break it in terms of oil and gas is to ensure, and you can do it with a simple opposition majority, you can do it with an opposition majority in parliament,
Mhm.
to reform that legislation so that the decisions on how to hold that money and how to spend that money are done by a board that includes members of the opposition and the third party, but not just includes them, gives them the decision-making power. So that if you have five on the board, two will
Mhm.
be from government, two will be from opposition, and the fifth will be the third party. So
Well,
that at last there's true accountability.
right. I noticed
No,
Gilda Smith has probably summarized it well that we do need a power broker to keep the big parties in check. And that's the position Anog is taking, that let us be your power broker.
let us be our power broker, but also we are recognizing the reality that at the end of the day in Guyana, 80% of the population are party loyalists. They will vote
Yeah,
based on ethnic alliances. So we
correct.
are not trying to make grandiose promises about how we are going to run the country. All we are saying to the Guyanese people is there are enough of you there to recognize the harm that has been done and understand why we are second poorest to Haiti. And those of you who recognize that and have moved away from your party loyalty, from your ethnic comfort zone,
Right.
and are willing to vote for a third voice,
I think
if,
I
if
think one of the things that you should know, because this is a feedback that's coming to me, that it is refreshing to hear a party, and I think yours has been the only one thus far that I know of. It's refreshing to hear a third party, a small party or a new party, um, take the position that look, we are not going to give you strategies to run Guyana. We're going to give you strategies how to change how Guyana is being run, how to make that impact. Now, one of our other viewers I think, Chublal Daramdin has asked a question. How do you plan to use your brokerage power to alleviate poverty and brutality and violence in the country and in what we have going on across?
Those are all interconnected. Poverty, brutality, violence, they're all rooted in poverty and unemployment.
Right.
And poverty and unemployment are the result of gross fiscal mismanagement, gross mismanagement of the economy over 50 years. We weren't always like this.
Right.
Now, it has been aggravated by the ridiculous way in which the sugar estates were closed, throwing thousands of people on the street without a job. Right now, if you go through Berbice, they have a caste net economy. There are father figures, people who run households, who wake up every day and go with a caste net to catch fish because that is how they're going to feed their family. They have a kitchen garden and that's all they have. And they're all doing the same thing because that is all they have. It is inexcusable that we are living like this. In Georgetown, the powers that we don't feel it because they've paid themselves a 50% increase. They're enjoying their perks. But when you go out of Georgetown and you see what's going on in the country areas, we need to be alarmed. We need to be afraid because that is where crime comes from. People don't want to steal. They don't want to break in your house. But in a situation of poverty and unemployment, where the education system has failed, and then worse yet, you've removed blue-collar jobs, and the people who are physically able to do those blue-collar jobs are left with no jobs at all, you will only have one end result.
Tim,
So
here's a question. Here's another question for you. Would ANOG encourage, or what's your view on releasing full remuneration for all government ministers?
I'm sorry, what do you mean by that, Joe? Releasing full remuneration?
Yeah, would you make public the full remuneration package for all government ministers, for all ministers?
Of course, but I would go further. Right now in the public sector, and that goes up to the ministries, and it gets worse the higher up you go until you get to a minister's level. To just talk about a minister's salary is not to give the full story by any stretch.
Absolutely.
Because the allowances that they get, the tax-free, the duty-free concessions they get, the different maid services and that kind of thing that they get, make the actual salary almost insignificant.
Correct.
What has happened with us is that we have camouflaged the wealth that we pay to our high-ranking officials by giving them those allowances and those duty-free concessions. Meanwhile, the rest of us suffer. I'll give you this example. You may know that in Guyana, if you buy a car that is 2,000 cc's or less, you pay approximately $2 million duty on that. As soon as you go higher and you buy a car that's 2,400 cc's or 3,000 cc's, a vehicle like that, you pay as much as 60,000 US on that. Now, every single parliamentarian that gets into parliament hustles to buy a Prado that they wouldn't otherwise afford because no one can afford that duty. And I'll give you a figure that not many people know. 98% of those Prados you see, those Land Cruisers that you see, those large vehicles that are over 2,000 cc's, come into this country duty-free. They come into this country under a tax exemption enjoyed by those people who are pretending to serve us. So that means that that particular tax regime is not designed to collect revenue because it's not getting any revenue. 98% of them coming in free.
It's basically a barrier. It's a class barrier.
It is a class barrier. Now, how can our political leaders look at us and make nonsensical promises about 50,000 jobs and about fixing this and fixing that? I saw an ad by the current administration claiming that they built hundreds of houses while they've been here. How can they look us in the eye and they perpetuate this kind of horrendous unfairness, this horrendous inequality, treating this country as if it's their own personal candy store?
Correct.
We have to get rid of this kind of.
Tax-free too.
So for me, not just make it transparent, but I would remove allowances. I would remove duty-free concessions. I would say there is a statutory formula If you qualify, this is the tax you pay. And not just for a minister, for everybody. So that
Correct.
you don't get a duty-free concession at a minister's discretion, because that is subsidization. It creates unfairness and disparity and creates corruption. And you don't get allowances that you can hide, pretending that this modest amount is your salary. The money that you get is your salary, and that is where it goes. And it
Absolutely.
needs to be transparent and simple so that the most ordinary person can look at it and understand and not be bewildered by one set of array of figures that deals with allowances and duty-free concessions and that kind of thing. If we do that, if we simplify life that way, transparency would be much greater. And
Absolutely.
people would see the extent to which our leaders are robbing this nation blind.
Tim, put on your legal cap a little bit, both you and maybe on behalf of Ralph. The current government has done two things in the past fortnight. One, they have virtually terminated, the services of the Director General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. In addition to that, part B of that is that they have then created a new position, a PS position, and employed one of their own. The second act they did was to terminate heads of missions. Now it's weeks leading up to an election. And what's your thought? What's ANOG's reaction to this?
This is not something that should be done 3 months before an election, 2 months before an election. We have a government that we've already established as a caretaker government because it has outlived its constitutional mandate. We should have had elections a year ago. We are in a constitutional no man's land, which fortunately has been saved, has been salvaged by the agreement of the parties that a new chairman of elections commission is appointed and a date for elections is set. So although we're already in constitutional no man's land, there's light at the end of the tunnel. But there is absolutely no excuse for a caretaker government that should not be making policy decisions, should not be spending our money, should not be hiring and firing the way they are, to make such profound and long-lasting changes as are being made now. It does not augur well, and I do not understand how it can be justified or by a government that may not be here in 3 months.
Well, it's done under the guise of professionalize the services. That's the word I think that's quoted from the president himself. And I must say, Tim, there's been a lot of concern that the March 2nd date, by virtue of the fact that Parliament has not been dissolved as yet, that the March 2nd date seems to be another date that might be pushed back. What are your thoughts? What are ANOG's concerns with regards to this? Is there any cause for concern?
There was cause for concern the day that James Patterson was appointed to GCOM. There was cause for concern before that, when the first list of 5 submitted by Leader of the Opposition, Jagdeo, for the position of chairman was rejected in its entirety by President Granger. There have been indications of problems since then. And the AFC, I know that everyone says they're politically dead and they will never recover. But the reason that they are condemned in my mind is their silence during that process. Because illegalities were taking place, and illegalities were taking place against a backdrop of a history that the whole of Guyana knows about. You should not interfere with an election process, a statutory process for monitoring and running the elections, given the history of electoral fraud which has taken place in Guyana. It rings too many wrong notes.
Right.
And the AFC sat down silently
Correct.
during a process when adults went to a foreign court to argue seriously that 65 divided by 2 was something that it was not.
Yes. Yes.
So you cannot recover from that morally, ethically, and you should not, in any realistic political environment, recover from that politically. And yet, we are seeing that because 80% of us remain ethnically allied, the 2 ethnic parties remain exactly the same. I am worried, yes. I hope we have the elections on the 2nd of March, but we will have elections when President Granger says so.
Well, yes, and one of the pluses I've seen is that the U.S. Embassy recently, and you know, good for them, they released a statement in which they spoke about the Robert Ellis's statement. But as part, there's a one-liner there in that statement that says, elections, they look forward to elections on March 2nd. And so I think that is a little bit of a exclamation mark at the end of the letter that was good. Tim, I would like you to address this notion of, given all the fact about corruption, and given what we know, the history of Guyana has shown that the politicians dip their hands, especially at election time, into reserves that have been set aside. They distribute that, and then new parties like yourself, you do not have the playing field is not level. You are fighting against people who are using state funds. You're campaigning against people who are using state funds. What are ANOG's position with regard to campaign financing?
You you have to be pragmatic as well as idealistic. You want the best ideal, but you have to recognize the reality. In Guyana, the largest awarder of contracts is the government. The largest employer is the government. The entity that has the greatest financial impact on the everyday life of citizens and the everyday commercial life of businesses is the government. The result of that is that there is no businessman in Guyana who is going to openly support a third party or is going to openly support one of the two big parties.
Right.
If he is faced with the fear that the party he supports might lose, because he will certainly be subject to victimization by the other party. We know in Guyana, and we've had experience of it, those businesses contribute to both sides. They hedge their bets.
Yes.
So we have become a nation of hypocrites, where we smile and slap each other on the back, and we still give a small piece to the other side, hedging our bets just in case the people that we're smiling with don't win. We've become a nation of hypocrites. And what happens then is that real political policy, real economic policy, real social ideals and social projections and social aspirations as a part of a political party's mandate become secondary. They're not relevant anymore.
Right.
What is relevant is to do your maths to see who is more likely to win, because whichever side wins, whether you like them or not, whether you look like them or not, you need them on side if you're going to continue to make money as a businessman.
Correct.
And if, God forbid, you guess wrong, you suffer for it.
Correct. Tim, here is what. The election, the 2020 election, I would like you to comment on the following question I've received. I personally, to put something before I ask the question, a new and united party vis-a-vis 2020 elections. Are you guys here for the long haul, or is it short term, your focus is on 2020?
A new and united Guyana is there for the long haul. The reason that a new and united Guyana came out now, at a time when there was fear of victimization and when we've seen victimization, and when there's an atmosphere of uncertainty, and when the two main parties have really managed to polarize the electorate, the reason that we've decided this is an important time is that oil money is coming. And therefore, if there are only two parties to contest the March 2020 elections, if you've only got one of two places to put your eggs, then mathematically speaking, the party that wins the government will also control Parliament. And by controlling Parliament, the government will, as a result, control the purse strings from oil and gas. There will be nobody to stop Minister Jordan putting that money in the New York account. So that you will have corruption, but there will be so much money that roads will be built, bridges will be built. There will be electricity projects all around the place. Each contract will be a corrupt contract. But the party loyalists will point to those same corrupt contracts and say, look, a road being built, our government is doing a good job. And the government that wins, whether it's PPP or APNU, will remain in power forever, because they will be able to, with their corrupt contracts, even with the crumbs that are left from oil and gas, will be able to show progress in infrastructure, progress in education, progress in road building.
Right.
So that although Guyana is not benefiting as it should, they ensure that they are entrenched forever. We cannot have that. Guyana will suffer, and we will be in serious trouble if that is allowed to happen. We will see such extreme wealth among the government ministers and among the powers. They will build castles and they will drive around in bulletproof cars. And the rest of us who have to live in the society will suffer, and we will see the decline of all the other industries. We will see the decline of gold, of timber, of fishing. We will see the decline of all of those because oil money will be what holds the government up, and they will not care about anything else.
Correct, correct. So is there, give me your answer there that that you're in for the long haul. Will we sometime in the near future see Tim as the presidential candidate?
I've been asked that before, Yoke, and the truth is, I would be much happier to go quietly back to my professional life and seclude myself away, cloister myself away in my office and carry out the practice of law, because that's what I'm happy doing. I am not naturally inclined to this. I don't want to be out there in the public. I feel I do more good, and I'm in the area of my expertise, which is law. Now that translates, I agree, into understanding how Parliament works, understanding constitutional reform and what can be done by a party that has a few seats in Parliament. So hopefully I'm of some use to a new United Guyana. But at this stage, I am not going to promise you that, although who knows what the future holds.
Great. Tim, it's been wonderful having you. I would like to ask you the question that just came into me here. Will and you and United Guyana consider coalition with either of the two big parties?
Never. The harm in Guyana is because we have a population with two large ethnic groups and a political framework with two large ethnic parties. Therefore, there is no accountability by those parties to the people because the people will vote for the party of their ethnic alliance.
Great. Tim, thank you. It's been wonderful. Your final thoughts on your current vision going into the new year?
I want to say to Guyanese, I've seen a lot of comments. A lot of armchair critics have been, showing their own bias and their own views. The small parties that are coming out, all of them, not some of them, all of them, are showing great courage. The individuals are not here for personal aggrandizement. They're not going to get rich doing this because they're not going to get into government. They are doing it because they love Guyana. They are true patriots and they recognize the harm that is being done by the two parties. And I want to say to Guyanese, look at them in that context. See where you think they are going to go and how you think they are going to personally benefit from what's going on. And if you agree that the personal benefit to them is very remote and very unlikely, then ask yourselves, why are the small parties doing this? Is it because they think they can get rich? Or is it because they are patriots and they see the harm and it is time to heal Guyana? It's time to fix things.
Absolutely. And I think I must admit, I must say this to our viewers out there, speaking to yourself, to Ralph, who I've known for a very long time, Robert Badal, and other leaders, and people who are now getting into politics. I believe there is a genuine concern that everybody wants to contribute to the development of this country. And Tim, I must say to you and your team, congratulations, keep up the good work. And we'll certainly do this again because I would like to have yourself and maybe one or two of your members to have a more in-depth discussion as to your strategies and your plans going into election and thereafter. So thank you so much for being here tonight, and your final comments, closing words, and maybe a Merry Christmas to everybody if we don't see each other again.
Well, thank you very much, Yoke, for having me. It was a pleasure as always. Your comments are insightful and your questions are on point. It's no Christmas season. One wonderful thing about us Guyanese is that we live together, we rub shoulders, and we get along so well, whether we go to worship in a temple, in a masjid, or in a church.
That's right.
So I want to say to my Guyanese brothers and sisters, have a good Christmas. Be safe. Be happy, be calm, and let us ensure that when elections come, we face it with a maturity and a calmness that belies the polarization that the two large parties are trying to accomplish right now.
Correct. Thank you so very much, Tim. It's been wonderful. Give our regards from all the viewers to your party. Have a great Christmas too, and thank you very much to our viewers out there. We're gonna continue this discussion. Thank you, Tim. Have a great night. We're going to continue this discussion by having Mr. Charles Sugrim on our show for a couple minutes to discuss post-show analysis My brother Charles, welcome to the show once again. It's wonderful to have you.
Hi, Yog. It has been a really great show, and I must take my hat off to both of your um, persons today, Mr. Badal and Mr. Jonas. They're two brilliant sons of Guyana. They have done pretty well. Their presentation was par excellent, and I hope that the people of Guyana listen to it, and those who will look afterwards will realize that these gentlemen are the future of Guyana, and we need them to be part of the body politics of Guyana.
Right. Charles, I know that you yourself you would have taken a position in the past and present that you are supportive of new parties. You're supportive of innovative ideas. You're supportive of breaking the mold kind of thing. So listening to Robert and listening to Timothy Jonas representing two distinct parties, because here is what, Charles. ANOG and New and United Guyana, they're focused on a lot of things that includes, but is not limited to constitutional reform, to looking at the judiciary, looking at police service, but more, they're eager to be the power broker for Guyana. They're eager to be that power broker. Robert wants more to look at investment and strategies to market Guyana. So they're two, not necessarily the same, two distinctly different set of people with different agenda. But your thoughts, these two can come together and make a wonderful team.
And that's my concern, Yog. When I listened to Jonas a minute ago, and he spoke of the patriotism of the new parties that we talk about, I really believe they're real patriots of Guyana, and they see that both the big parties, as we call them, they're incapable of really governing our country in a really fair and justifiable way. My problem is when Jonas mentioned that the independent voters might be about 20% of the population. I think that might be a bit high. I think the independent voters may be 10% of the population, because what I've seen and heard is that the PPP and the PNC, the grassroots operation, is so strong that they have these people tied up there. And if you go against one or the other, you seem to be a traitor to your race, basically. So this 10%, or Jonas said 20%, but my fear is, with all the new parties that we have, if the 10% or 15% is split among them, it kind of watered it down and it dilutes their effect. So the effect that they can have as member of parliament is diluted, because they're not voting as a bloc. And what you mentioned there is that if these new parties can see it among themselves that they will not win the election based on our current pattern of voting, but together they will hold a strong force in parliament if they work together. And I'm glad Robert mentioned that he's talking to the smaller parties or the new parties. If these guys can put their ego aside and put Guyana first, if you're a patriot, you will put your ego aside. The reality is they will not win the election. The election will be won by the PNC or the PPP, period. But there will be a check in parliament. We're hoping that the 10% or the 15%, the seats allocated to those people, will deny the majority of parliamentary seats to whoever wins the election. If that happens, we will have a great country, knowing oil money is coming in next year.
Correct. But there's a danger with timelines now, isn't there? Look, nomination day will be what, 30 days before elections. So we're looking at
January 10th, I think. January 10th.
Okay. Good. So you really don't have time, because for them to be, in other words, you were saying one of your recommendations, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the new parties should collate and form one head going into elections. Is that what you're saying?
And they're all patriots, exactly. These are all patriots, whoever they are, whether it's ANOG, whether it's Change Guyana, whether it's the Liberty and Justice Party, whatever they are, these guys, if they work together, and that's what I'm appealing to you guys, you leaders of parties, please be a patriot for your country. Put aside this ego. The reality is none of you will win the election individually. You will only be spoiler votes, because even if we have, someone mentioned we have all about 8% independent people, maybe it's 8%, maybe it's less than that, I don't know. We will know on election day. But the thing is, if we split that 8 or 10%, we're in big trouble. These guys are going to have no seats in parliament. They'll not have enough votes to have a seat, whether it's a top-up seat or the regional seat.
Correct.
And it will be the PNC and PP back in office. So we are defeating ourselves.
Correct. Thank you so very much, my brother, Professor Charles. Thank you so very much. Your post-show analysis has been on point. And I must tell you, you would have tapped into what a lot of people are thinking, that for the small parties to really make an impact.
Let's say the new parties.
The new parties,
yeah,
for them
yeah.
to have an impact, they need to get together too. So one of the things that came out, let me touch you on this, let me ask you this. One of the things that came out from both Robert and Timothy Jonas, and Tim was very pragmatic in dealing with the aspect of corruption. But this whole thing about corruption, because unless the new parties are able to get together to stop the oil money flowing out, we're doomed. What's your take on that?
Excellent point. The thing is this, I know Jonas mentioned that the Minister of Finance saying that the oil money will be deposited in the federal bank here in New York. The thing about that is, yes and no. That money going to the Federal Bank of New York, guess what? They're going to monitor if there is money laundering. They will monitor if there's excessive use of that money for personal use. And these guys in the United States, they know it very well. So the thing is, yes, it's not on a consolidated fund, but it can be traced, because once it's in that fund and any money used from it, you will have to account for it. So the thing is, corruption. And I said the last program we had with you, Yog, and you're a very really great moderator, and I hope you continue with this for a long time. I cannot stop bringing the Singapore example. The tone is set at the top. If the top is not a principled person and they allow things, they themselves are corrupt. Look, I got a note today. The president of Guyana, President Granger, from 2015 to 2019, his travel overseas and his medical treatment is over 300 million Guyana dollars. Nobody's talking about that. The PPP, when Mr. Navin Chandapal was sick, they spent over $100 million on his treatment. What happened to the other Guyanese? And that's our problem. So there is so much corruption. The guy go and steal a pack of cigarettes somewhere and he's locked up. And I'm not saying that's right, that's wrong. But these white-collar criminals that we have in government, they will steal hundreds of millions and still drive along in their fancy cars. And that's the problem we have. Unless we have tone is set at the top that is principled and corruption is rooted out, that will never change in Guyana.
And I think one of our brothers, Joseph, has said that it's a beautiful point you're making, and he has challenged the new parties. If you're patriots and not just after oil, then you should all unite. So here is one of the last questions I'd like to put in front of you, Professor. The dichotomy, a lot of people don't see this. It's all nice and hunky-dory to say the money will be in the federal bank, or the money will be in a separate account, or whatever. You know what? The $18 million was in a separate account too. But guess who's directed for it to be used out? It's the government of Guyana. In other words, Timothy and Robert too, they were quite candid that so long as you give the minister or you give the government this authority to spend, and there is no public check and balance, then the money is gone without you knowing it.
But that's your point, York. I mean, the funds will have to be used by the government. The government has the authority to decide where the money should go to. But those checks and balances you talk about is what Parliament needs to put in place to ensure that no minister or no government can spend nilly-willy unless it's a program that is approved by Parliament, and we need a strong, independent Parliament. We've been advocating for that. I know they didn't talk much about their policies themselves because the time ran out and it's only limited time. But I hope that, again, like most independent Guyanese want, and I'm sure you're one of those to you, if these new parties can work together, one force. You know, there's a guy from Lagrange. He was a PNC guy, a very good guy. One of elder that I looked up to, he passed away now. He said to us, he said, you know what? If you have one pointer, you know, one broom, one pointer in the broom, there's very little you can do about it. If a fly come, you try to hit the fly and you're in trouble. You put all those pointers together and you have a broom now. Let the fly come now and see what you will do. So the thing is, together we can get it done. Separately, we're in trouble. So I'm appealing to you guys again, Yoga, please use your office there in Guyana to ensure that all these new parties put aside their ego. They're not going to win the election, but they will be a massive force in Parliament if they unite and work together.
Which is what we want. We want to have government that can be held accountable. And here's another thing I propose, Professor. My brother, I am proposing that Guyanese need to call every single, I don't care, we have to respect privacy of contracts. That's aside from that. I want to call the political parties to make a pact with public that every single public contract, every contract will go through an independent body who will have the authority to release details as far as it has anything to do with corruption. In other words, I'm saying there should be 4 or 5 independent personnel that can have an oversight on government activities. If not, Charles, we're doomed. If we cannot have public oversight, we are doomed because it all becomes political.
That is one option. The other option I would recommend is that there's a local content in it. So if a bridge is to build at Baggotville, let's say, on the West Bank, then people within that community must be given the authority to go and ensure this is a specification for the contract, and they will ensure the contractor built to that specification. If they don't, they can object, call somebody, the same committee you're talking about, and say, listen, the contractor is not performing as per the contract document. We need you to come and check it now. The contract should stop until it's rectified. If we get that happening, things are going to change. But again,
absolutely, because what's happening presently is contracts are going on, they're doing substandard work. Who will you appeal to? The same government that put the contractor in place.
That's the thing, that's the thing. And that's the problem. And both Robert and Jonas mentioned the point. You know, the thing is, the contracts are made such a way that one is given to the supporters, in most cases to whoever in the government is, and then there's a kickback from that contract. So we're a wheel spinning around like we were crazy and nothing gets done. And that's the problem.
Correct. Professor, thank you very much. It's been wonderful to chat with you again. I hope we can do this again. And I must invite our viewers and your good self. Next Monday, we're going to have Jean Mangal and Annette Arjun in a, as you know, that's going to be a real educative discussion too.
Another there are also 2 patriotic Guyanese that is really think of Guyana.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we're going to have Jean Mangal and Annette Arjun on Monday. And then next Wednesday, we're going to have a discussion with the 3 parties that have women as their presidential candidates.
Beautiful.
So we're going to hope, so far we have confirmation from Citizens Initiative. We have also had confirmation from Dr. Kisoon, and we're waiting for the 3rd confirmation. But we are certainly hoping next Wednesday we'll bring the 3 ladies together who are heads of their own parties.
And can you ask Yog that all these 6 or 7 parties, the new parties, please put aside their ego, come together and let us run with one united front. And they will make a great impact in Guyana if they do that.
Correct. So, Professor, thank you for being there, and I'm going to look forward to your post-show analysis sometime again in the future.
All right.
To our viewers out there, it's been wonderful to have Robert Badal and Timothy Jonas and Professor Charles Sugrim here tonight. Let me close by quoting from somebody who's very close to me, Anita, who said that Guyanese are not strong enough. We, the people, need to hold the elected government accountable. We are paying them for their expenses, so we need to speak up and free our minds from bondage.
Exactly.
Before
you go, I just want to hear from New York. We had snow today for the first time. So from the cold, we want to wish everyone in Guyana a very Merry Christmas and a very Happy New Year. And I hope that the elections of March the 3rd will be free, fair, and a new government will have by the 4th or the 5th of March.
Thank you. Thank you. Professor, thank you. It's been wonderful to have you. Have a great night. Let me say thanks to Devin, Kumar, Nohar Singh, and the entire GlobeSpan team for making we went a little bit extra late tonight, but thank you all for being there for us. Thank you also very much to the sponsors and the advertisers, to our viewers out there. Have a great evening. Good night, everyone.
Thank you so much.